Hi, and welcome to Texas History, Paul Revere's 7th grade social studies online course. This is our first one. I hope you guys are safe and healthy, that your families are too. I'm excited to start learning again, especially on this new unit we are about to jump into. My name is Mr. Anderson, in case you're Miss Pisano's or Mr. Davis Owen's student and don't know my name. And today I'll be presenting the 7 principles of government. The government of the United States of America was created by people who had been ruled by a king. They were concerned that the government they created not be too powerful, not be able to control the lives of its citizens, and be responsive to the needs of the people. They believed that they could create a republic, a nation built on the idea that people vote for what they want. Therefore, they built this nation around 7 basic principles, which we're going to look at today. The first principle I'd like to talk about is called popular sovereignty. Popular, meaning liked by many people, and sovereignty, basically meaning power. You could break that down into really people power. And if you want to know how we express our power as citizens of the United States, well, we vote. We vote. That is the way we express our power. Popular sovereignty. It's about voting. Popular sovereignty is the idea that the people rule. We have the power. The people rule. The power of the government comes from us. Popular sovereignty. The people rule. The power of the government comes from the people. Our second principle today is republicanism. Republicanism is the idea that we choose elected representatives to speak on our behalf to our government. Our representatives, they are the people we send to Congress. They are the people who are part of the legislative branch who write the laws for this nation. Republicanism is the idea that we vote and choose people to represent us, to run the government for us on our behalf. Republicanism, representative. Republicanism is when we choose a representative to go to the government for us. Popular sovereignty is the idea that the people rule and the power of the government comes from the people. Republicanism is how we rule by choosing who we want to be our leaders. Republicanism. The government is run by elected representative, reps of the public. Popular sovereignty means we have the power, the people. And we use our power to give temporary power to elected representatives. That's called republicanism. It is their job to protect and guarantee our individual rights. Individual rights is the third principle of government. This is the belief that people are born with certain rights that the government should not be allowed to take away. Now, there are extenuating circumstances. For example, you have the right to freedom, but if you use your freedom to kill people or steal from people, that freedom can be taken away. However, it is important that the government respects those rights as long as we are living the way the government and we as a people decide we should. To that end, we created something called the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights identifies specific rights that we have. We are going to learn about those later. Right now, I simply want you to understand that I think it's the third principle, I think we're talking about the third one now, of government is the idea of individual rights. Individual rights. People have basic rights that the government cannot take away. The idea of popular sovereignty means that power comes from the people, and we use our power as people to elect people, representatives, to represent us in our government, republicanism. But we have individual rights, so even though we have a government, the government shouldn't be allowed to take away our individual rights unless we break the law. To this end, we believe in limited government, keeping the government small. It shouldn't have power to simply tell us we have to interfere in our general lives. And by the same token, the government is not all powerful. Members of the government must obey the laws as well. If we have a right to freedom of religion, the government is limited. It cannot tell us that we have to worship in a specific way or have a specific religion. At the same time, the individuals in government must obey the law. They can't simply decide a president can't simply decide, I'm never going to leave office and I'm going to become a king. They must obey the law as well. Limited government. The government is not all powerful, and members of the government must obey the laws. Power comes from the people, popular sovereignty, and we elect individuals to represent us in government, Republicanism. But their job is to protect and ensure we keep our individual rights. Thus, government is limited. Government isn't allowed to interfere in our basic day-to-day lives and take away our rights, and the people of the government must obey the law. This brings us to federalism. Federalism is the idea that power should be shared between the federal government and the state government, the federal government, the national government, Washington, D.C., and our local state governments. Federalism is the idea that even though the federal government has a right to make certain laws, to declare war, to make murder illegal, state governments have the right to make their own laws. And they have these rights because we recognize that one local area may want one law, while another local area wants a different law. Thus, there might be one age to get a driver's license in one state and a different age in another state. Federalism is just the idea that the federal government has certain laws it makes, but the states get to make laws where the federal government chooses not to. It's a way of sharing power between federal and local authority. Federalism. The powers of the government are divided between the national federal government and state governments. The seventh principle is the separation of powers. Power of the government is divided into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. We divide the government into three branches to keep the government from getting too powerful. If the government was one single entity, let's say a king, that king would have all the power, and all that power would allow the king to do whatever they want. The same thing with the government. We not only do not want one person to have all the power, we don't want one part of the government to have all the power. So we split that power into three equal branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative is our representatives. Remember Republicanism? Republicanism is about electing our representatives to the legislative branch who passes and creates laws. The other is the executive branch. That is our president. The president's job is to enforce the law. And the judicial branch. The judicial branch is the Supreme Court. It's made up of judges we call justices. Their job is to judge the law. By the principle of popular sovereignty, we have the power. So we use the principle of republicanism and elect individuals to serve in government for us. But it's their job to protect our individual rights. Thus, we don't want them to become too powerful and take away our rights, so we rely on the principle of limited government. Because of limited government, we divide the government's powers. We give certain powers to the federal government and certain powers to the state governments. And to keep our federal government from taking power away from the states or our individual rights, we break these powers apart. We separate the powers. Separation of powers. The power of the government is divided into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Now we've arrived at our seventh and final principle of government: checks and balances. Checks and balances comes from separation of powers. After all, once we've separated the powers into the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, the executive branch, the president, and the legislative branch, our representative government, we give them power to check and balance each other. That means that each of these individual branches has the power to overrule and control the other branches. We give them different powers, but we try to make sure those powers are equal. For example, the president enforces the law, but only Congress can write the law. The president has the right to protect America, and in fact, the duty to protect America. So if the president thinks that a wall will help protect America, he can build one. There's just one problem. Only Congress can give him the money to do that. So if Congress doesn't like what he's doing, they can refuse to give him the money to fund his project. These checks and balances are built into our government so that no one specific part, the executive, legislative, or judicial, ends up with too much power. Checks and balances. Each branch can limit the control of the other two branches to prevent any branch from becoming too powerful. So let's break these principles down one final time. Power comes from the people, popular sovereignty, and we elect people to run our government for us, Republicanism. But the government must respect our individual rights. Therefore, we should have a limited government that's not all powerful but must obey the law. We also want to share the power between the federal government and the state's government. So we believe in the power of federalism. The power of the federal government should be broken into branches. We call this the separation of powers, breaking the government into the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And finally, each of those branches has checks and balances, the ability to check and balance and prevent any branch from becoming too powerful.